I said this morning I'm always reluctant to talk about an individual case, and because it's so close, it must be very raw for the family involved. But in that particular case, the minute the request for a termination was asked for, then it would have triggered the process. And a multidisciplinary team would have come into being and would have assessed that risk.
So it could very well have led to a different outcome in that case.
There would have been a different approach.
And away from that, could this, had it been implemented 21 years ago, could it have made any impact to women's lives in that intervening period?
Very difficult to know that, but I'm sure it would. I'm sure that recent events were the only events that occurred in that 21 years. But difficult enough to know that, but I'm sure it would have had different outcomes for a lot of women.
We've seen the debate become polarised already, as it has been for 30 years in this country. Would you be fearful now that that is the way this debate is going to go on, and that somehow this legislation might not get over the line if enough voices within government are found to oppose it?
Well, I would hope that the debate up to this point on the government side has been very calm and very rational, and that's been a deliberate position we've taken, and I would hope it would continue in that vein. Can't control other forces, we all know that, but I would appeal to people to be reasonable and rational and to use language that is not offensive to one side or the other. People have different views on this issue. Within all political parties there are different views. Within society there are different views. There will be a public hearing of the Health Committee, and Jerry Buttimer will chair that. He's done an excellent job up to this, and we'll go back in now with the heads of bill. And I believe that, in fact, this legislation, because it is very clearly about what we need to do and very limited to what we have to do, then I believe that this legislation will be enacted.
But you will lose TDs. You've already lost one.
Well, I suppose at the end of the day, democracy is both a very robust thing and a very fragile thing. And people have to make up their own minds. And they will have to look at all of the aspects of this. And when it comes to voting on this legislation, if we have a vote on this legislation, when it comes to voting on this legislation, then it will be individuals who have different opinions right across a range, and they will have to make up their minds on that. The one thing we cannot do, Jonathan, is in fact legislate for people's thoughts.
Just one final point. The government hopes will be through by July before the Dáil rises. What of the possibility it may still be referred to the Supreme Court, because legislation, if the President deems it appropriate, can be referred to for further consideration? What do you make of that prospect? Well,
the President, as you know, was a parliamentarian himself for a long number of years, and has a huge knowledge in relation to legislation and the operations of it. So if the office of the President decides to refer this piece of legislation to the Supreme Court, by the way, has already made up its mind on this particular issue, and all we are doing is putting into a legislative framework what the Supreme Court decided.
But the argument is that the Supreme Court made this decision based on false facts. That's what the pro-life argument have said all along. So would a referral to the Supreme Court almost be helpful in this regard?
I think it would be fruitless. I think the Supreme Court has already made its mind up on this issue, and we are legislating in line with what the Supreme Court said. And people have different opinions as to what that particular judgment was. It was 21 years ago, but nevertheless, I think we have to remind ourselves on the circumstances that they made that decision. A 14-year-old girl who was raped, found herself pregnant, and was suicidal as a result of it. I think we can all empathise with that, and I think the Supreme Court, which at the time, by the way, were 4 men, conservative men, in their 50s, looked at all of the facts in relation to that particular case and decided that suicide was in fact a threat to the life of the mother. I think we have to remind ourselves of that.
Minister of State Kathleen Lynch, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you, Jonathan.